from the chickens' perspective, I think they prefer cages to free range because they die less.
Welcome to episode 53 of Farm to Markets. Today we are talking about the European energy shortage, the impact of a shortened life expectancy, and more lightning round questions at the end. Europe has been trying to contain an energy shortage caused by Russia and the closure of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. What impact do you think this will have on the European economy and their stock market? Alex?
Well, the answer to that, this is kind of one of those crystal ball questions where, it's hard to predict a situation that's constantly changing. But I would say that it depends on how long this conflict in Ukraine goes and how long the European Union is going to continue sanctioning Russia over it. The things we're already seeing right now are, pretty significant levels of rationing and price hikes. Like take the UK, for example. The memes are going around where, industrial bakeries that had a 12,000 pound power bill monthly are seeing them in the 50 to 60,000 pound range now, and they're just closing because they can't possibly pass those huge price increases on to consumers, and they can't afford to pay them themselves. In Germany, you're likely to see policymakers have to decide between people keeping their houses warm in the winter and keeping their manufacturing plants online. And meanwhile, the Norwegians, who are kind of the more successful Northern European equivalents of the Venezuelans, who finance everything with oil and gas prices, aren't at all interested in lowering those prices. So, the wealthier countries, I think you're likely to see them pay exorbitant prices for LNG shipped in from North America. Probably be able to continue getting the bare minimum of what they need, but they'll pay a lot more for it and they'll have to ration it. Other countries, they're going to have to start learning to do without for the long haul, especially with Nord Stream 1 offline. Looks like indefinitely, and it's unlikely that the United States and the rest of the natural gas producing world will be able to ramp up export facilities and tanker ships fast enough to make up the difference. So this is likely to cause, and it's already happening, an energy-based recession in Europe. They will see pretty significant, and the poorer the country, the worse the effects will be. Pretty significant economic declines. Standards of living are definitely going to go down. And this is, even longer term, you're potentially looking at serious problems politically within the EU over this. A country like Austria is joining with, countries like Hungary and now starting to think about whether or not staying in the EU is worth the price that they're paying. Or if they should get out so they can get out from under Brussels sanction regime. So this is going to be a real serious problem for Europe. And I think the lesson that any other country should learn from this is the same lesson that I've been hammering again and again. If you have the ability to produce energy domestically, it is really, really dumb to go elsewhere to get it, especially now that people realize that those far-flung energy supplies may all of a sudden get cut off and you've got no other option.
Like Alex touched on, there's a lot of variables in this scenario, but in the event that Russia completely shuts off the tap to oil and gas going to Europe, like Alex said, it would cause the European economy to shrink. It would slow down and shrink in the next coming months. Prices would creep higher, production would slow down, and it would probably be pretty rough for the economy in the short term. European companies would be forced to import oil and gas from other companies just to keep their economy running. But this is the kind of backfire you get from sanctions, especially half-measure sanctions like the ones Russia did. Europe's sanctions against Russian energy merely limited the supply of energy imports. It wasn't a complete ban like the US. The US said, hey, Russia, we don't like what you're doing. We're done buying your oil and gas. Find someone else to work with. But Europe said, well, we still need some of your oil and gas, but we want to make sure we punish you a little. So we're just going to limit the oil and gas that we buy. Well, Russia said, fine. If our gas and oil is too dirty for you, we'll just cut you off 100% and we'll sell it to China and we'll sell it to India for a discount. Which, by the way, are probably the only two countries benefiting from this whole energy war right now. I don't think Europe was ready for this. I think Russia kind of called their bluff. And I think three things can happen. One, Europe, they scramble and they find some other countries to buy energy from. Two, Russia turns the taps back on. Or three, Europe lifts their sanctions. Right now, both these economies have guns pointed at each other's heads. However, I think Russia is in a better position to wait out Europe. So it will be interesting to see who gives first.
I think observing Europe is like watching Stupid 30 years in advance. Is that for decades, maybe even for an entire century, Europeans have gotten used to good leaders leading them and making all their decisions for them, sprinkled without several decades in that century where they had really marginal or not that great of leaders. It's a little bit different in Europe than it is in the United States. In the United States, we tend to prosper extremely well when leaders just stay out of our way. We don't really, in America, you're not really led to problem solving. It's like the government allows individuals to solve problems and they just kind of percolate through the economy. Europe, on the other hand, they desperately, the way they're designed and organized, they desperately need a leader who's not a moron to solve all their problems for them. And they made really bad decisions energy-wise over the last 25 years or so. In all this talk, has anybody heard any bad stuff happening to Norway? Norway is got so much stinking money because they basically drill for oil in the North Atlantic. And yeah, they pay some homage to green policies, but nothing like the other European Union nations. Quite frankly, if Great Britain had wanted to, they could be making money hand over fist in the North Sea as well. They just chose not to because they pandered to the green wing of their political system. Will this affect the world economy? Absolutely. But what Europe needs uniquely is they need an individual who's charismatic and inspiring, who will tell people what to do, step on a few toes, and get things running, because that's not going to percolate up like it might in the United States.
Hopefully what you say, I guess what you're seeing is a transition from reliance on Russian oil to hopefully at least a different type of energy. If oil's not going to work out for them, they have their coal plants that's not green, but they were kind of in the midst of like shuttering those plants, but they're probably going to need again. I think they have 2 nuclear plants that they had planned to close, but if put that plan on hold because they're going to need the energy for it. And kind of like everybody else said, is that hopefully just right now this is just a rocky energy transition for them, where they get off of their reliance on Russian oil and get more energy dependent on stuff that they can produce in their own borders. So as far as the stock market goes, it's already getting priced in. The market's been down for a while, and it's been down pretty sharply over the last couple of weeks here too. So I think a lot of this stuff is already getting priced in because markets, as everybody knows, are extremely forward looking. So a lot of it's getting priced in right now. The shock, and everybody's kind of coming to the realization of all the things that are going to happen this winter. But hopefully, maybe by end of 2023, 2024, they can get to a point where they have their own reliable energy source. All right. All right, so moving on. The Wall Street Journal published an article last week that showed life expectancy had again dropped in 2021 by 0.9 years, so almost 1 year. The average life expectancy in 2019 was 78.8 years and is now estimated to be 76.1 years. In general, what kind of implications do you think shorter life expectancy has?
Well, I think in order to answer the question, we have to dig into the data that they're reporting on, and the CDC blamed 2 trends over the last couple of years for the decline. Number 1 was obviously COVID, but number 2 was a pretty significant percentage jump in drug overdoses. So I don't think that this is really a long-term trend. Unless you think COVID is just going to keep ravaging the population for years to come. What it also probably doesn't mean is, it probably doesn't mean that people who are either not at risk of COVID and not overdosing on drugs, those people should not plan on living shorter lives. Life extending medications and technologies continue to get better and better every year. So I think if you can avoid overdosing on drugs and, catching COVID and then not taking care of yourself, if you do, that over the long haul, people should continue to plan to live longer and longer lives as the years go by. If it is a longer term trend, though, there's at least two things that will happen that I'll look at it from a money side. First is, let's look at like Social Security, Medicare spending. If people actually are going to be dying a few years sooner, probably means that those programs, dates where the trust funds will run out of money, is going to get kicked down the road a couple more years. And it'll give millennials and Zoomers a few more years to, I guess, dither about whether or not they want to raise taxes or do whatever to deal with that coming date. Especially since baby boomers are such a huge population that sooner or later, those programs are really going to get hammered by the baby boomer retirement. That everybody's known about that since the 80s. The other thing is, if people are living shorter lives, then you'll start to see, we talked about this a little bit in a recent video, a little bit earlier generational transfer of wealth. We talked about how people need inheritance earlier in life, whereas people are starting to inherit money when they're in their 50s or 60s now, rather than in their 30s and 40s like it was 100 years ago and before. So if that actually is the long-term trend, you might see people getting their inheritances a little bit earlier. But again, I don't think that long-term people should plan to live shorter and shorter lives.
I feel like I've been hearing that life expectancy has been declining pretty consistently for years now. I feel like ever since, like over the past decade, every year it seems like, oh, we're living shorter lives, despite the fact that the world is moving forward in pretty much all categories. So it's always kind of surprising to hear this data. But it's what, less than 1 year? It's not that, I don't know, it's not that big of a drop, I suppose. I think that now that people know that life expectancy is declining, maybe it'll change behavior a little bit. It's funny because when I socialize with people, it seems like people are only getting healthier. At least in my circle, drinking less alcohol, you don't see as many cigarettes anymore. Maybe it's just the types of people I associate with, but there's a kick for being more healthy. So I don't really, I don't see where the data is coming from. I did do a quick Google, and I guess some of the top habits that contribute to a shorter life expectancy are too much or too little sleep, sitting too much. Evidently, if you sit for more than 3 hours a day, statistically, you're going to die 2 years earlier. So I guess that's us. Not socializing enough, not reading enough books, and having a pessimistic outlook. All of those things are pretty prominent in our society right now. Most socialization is done via like Facebook or, social media, things like that. So I don't know. I think that the pendulum is just swinging. Right now, I guess we're all dying a little bit earlier. And then I think there'll be a point where we say, hey, let's not do this anymore. Let's live healthier lives. And then maybe the pendulum will swing back the other way. But to have it be completely average and consistent for forever, that's ridiculous. Yeah, some years it's going to be better, some years it's going to be worse, and that's just statistics. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact either way.
Alex certainly had an interesting take on the impact of the economy with people dying earlier and it not costing the Social Security Trust Fund as much money. I didn't see that angle coming, but I forgot he's Alex. So appreciate that comment. And to Drew's point about his circle of friends just seem to be really healthy. I'll bet you anything that the people in Drew's social circles are going to live much, much longer than the life expectancy of the United States. There's actually multiple communities that make up the American society. There are some that continue to advance, to continue to have longer lives, who read good books, eat good food, get plenty of rest, socialize, wake up every morning with a purpose. They're not living nihilistic lives. And I suspect that that group in America is going to live well into their 80s and 90s. It's the folks who believe that there's no reason to live, that I think I'm just going to sit in my house and do drugs, and I'm going to use fentanyl, and I'm going to fill this void in my soul by eating lots and lots of food. They're the ones who basically are driving up the early death rates or reducing the life expectancy. But as individuals, we don't have to choose to live as part of that community in our society. We can choose to live in the community that, like Drew runs in, where people are healthy and they're happy and they're engaged and they're involved in social activities and those sorts of things. And don't worry about that. I think more than anything else, the lower life expectancy is a harbinger of where we're going as a society. And I think I mentioned it either last week or the previous podcast about we're in a dark age where we've kind of plateaued for the first time in our history. And what we're seeing is we're starting to see declines in human flourishing. And this is just one of those examples. The reduction of test scores for fourth graders. The fact that you only have one waitress in a restaurant when you go out to eat because they can't find enough help. The reason why it takes 6 weeks to see a plumber because they're so worked out because they can't find labor. Those are all harbingers of explaining where we are as a society. In theory, we should be on a trajectory where tomorrow we're smarter than we are today. But once people get to the point, it's the doctrine of diminishing marginal utility. Once people get to a certain level of comfort, their enthusiasm for pushing the envelope to be even better tomorrow starts to wane. They're going, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with living to be 76 if I get to sit home and not have to work. But for those folks who want more out of life, I think their life expectancies will continue to increase.
Joe basically made the entire case for why I don't think the Star Trek economy will ever work is because, and in all seriousness, the book Trekonomics kind of goes into detail on like how we could potentially have like a Star Trek economy. But the point that Joe brought up is that once you reach a certain level of comfort, like all of a sudden your desire to get up early and really push yourself kind of goes away. I mean, there's a lot of people who would do that just for the sake of their reputation and just for the good of humanity. But there's also, probably just as many people who would not. And that's a problem. That's why if there's no incentive for people to get up in the morning and do stuff, I don't have a lot of hope that you're going to get a Captain Picard type economy anytime soon. Morbidly, kind of like Alex said, is that the shorter life expectancy does take a lot of pressure off of just about everything financial. So like Alex said, Medicare, Social Security, it's going to delay any type of bankruptcy or delay any default on payments or any reduction in payments that those programs have to pay out. It's better for annuity companies and life insurance companies that people die earlier because that takes less pressure off the shared pot. And for your own personal retirement plan, it's better if you have a shorter life expectancy than a longer one because then you don't need as much money. So, ultimately, if people are going to be living longer, they need to be living healthier and they need to be able to be, extend their producing years if we are going to start living longer. And, Joe made a lot of good points. The fact that life expectancy is getting shorter as things are getting better is certainly a problem. But again, from a financial standpoint, it's morbid, but it tends to take a lot of pressure off all the financial models if you're around a shorter amount of period of time than a longer period of time, which isn't the goal though. Like we don't want to just shorten everybody's life expectancy so it works better in the model. But I'm just saying that is an impact of it.
I wonder though if mortality rates are or people are dying early, life expectancy is going down. That assumes, it assumes that health is consistent. So I imagine that if death rates are going, or if people are dying earlier, then their health is declining as well. So maybe they're on Medicare and Medicaid and taking Social Security out earlier because their health is declining. Instead of getting sick in their 50s and 60s, maybe it's starting to reach into their 20s and 30s. I don't know. So financially, it might actually not, it might be a wash, or it might even be worse off depending on what the data says.
I mean, ultimately is that if the longer people live, they have to increase their years where they're actually, it can't be you're sitting in your house, 90 plus years old, just barely hanging on. I mean, if you're going to live longer, your quality of life has to be substantially better so that you can produce more. You don't need, other people to. You don't depend on other people as much for resources. So.
Well, you got to be careful with these national statistics. It's like
Right.
you say your population is 2 people. It's our one client who's 102 years old, and Chris Farley. And I don't know, Chris Farley was what, 45 or so when he died, and our client is 102. So you basically say, well, life expectancy is 70 something. Well, heck, is that what if you had a whole bunch of people who lived exactly the same way that Chris Farley lived in one group, and then another group where people tend to live very similarly to our client who's 102. In those two subsections, you're getting different outcomes. And when you throw them together, it's not like on a national trend, we're seeing a decline in life expectancy. What we're seeing is a decline in life expectancy in one segment of our economy.
Right. I think it's there's going to be less people living to 103, and it's more likely for people to die at age 50 instead of 55.
Bingo. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the lightning round. All right, the PGA announced the launch of the technology-focused golf league, or the TGL. The league will launch with 6 teams, each consisting of 3 PGA Tour players. The competition will be held in a specially designed stadium that will feature a virtual golf course and a state-of-the-art short game complex. The league will officially launch in January of 2024. Is golf headed in the right direction with this move? What do you think?
Well, I certainly think it's a novel idea, and at the very least, they're not going to be competing against Monday Night Football, which traditionally is a death slot during football season for anything that isn't pro football. I guess it's probably a good idea. The TV networks these days are pretty desperate for first-run content, and sports are one of the things that fills that gap. I probably won't be watching, but I think it's at least an interesting idea. If it doesn't work, at least they tried something.
I agree with Alex. I think it's a good idea. If people like it and they want to tune in, that's just one more source of entertainment for us. Why not?
I don't even have network television in my house, so I haven't watched a Monday Night Football game since college. So I can't imagine watching Monday Night Golf, which is virtual reality. It's not even real golf. It's basically guys with pieces of technology, and it's like Future World at Disney World, where you play fake golf, and they do a short game in a stadium where you watch them basically putt the last 40 feet. I wouldn't watch it, but heck, there's a lot of stuff I wouldn't watch that is making billions for the networks.
I don't know. In 1998, they came out with the movie Basketball, which is basically a combination of baseball and basketball, and that's kind of what this reminds me of. It was fun to watch, for a little bit, but I don't think you want to watch, it's not going to be anybody's favorite sport. Okay, the Major League Baseball, the Major League Baseball Players Association, which is the union that represents Major League Baseball players, announced its intent to unionize with the minor league baseball players. This is due to years of accusations of unfair treatment, which include wages that frequently fall below federal minimum living conditions. Do you think minor league baseball players should have union representation?
Personally, I'm always surprised that they haven't had their own union all this time. You've alluded to some of the pay issues. It's fairly low, and the lower level you get in minor league baseball, the worse it gets. But more so than the pay seems to be the living conditions. A lot of very low level players end up having to be housed for free by host families who volunteer to host players in exchange for tickets or perks at the ballpark, that kind of thing. So trying to break into the minor leagues, unless you're a pretty sought after draft pick, is pretty tough. I'm, like I said, I'm surprised they haven't. And they're pro baseball players. I guess probably they should have their own union if they want it.
No, absolutely not. Keep the money on the field. Let the best players play.
Unionized minor league baseball teams is like unionized street performers. I mean, really, all they really are doing is they don't want to get real jobs. So they want to play baseball, and they're not good enough to be in the pros. So they're doing the minor league thing. This reminds me of here in Whitefish, when the school crossing guards tried to join the teachers union because, they thought that somehow they could get pay raises for doing so. But absolutely not. But you know what? I don't care. If you feel entitled to play minor league baseball instead of getting a real job, and you think that this is your road to success, go for it.
I would be more in favor of high school crossing guards getting unionized than I would be minor league baseball players, because at some point you need high school crossing guards. You don't need more minor league baseball players. And the fact that you're considered pro is only because they give you like a stipend to actually play a game. You're not really pro. I mean, you're minor league, as the name implies. You're not the major league, so not that many people really care that you're playing baseball. And there's 3 tiers of like actual minor league baseball. There's A, AA, and AAA, and not to mention like a whole plethora of just non-affiliated teams in baseball. So I mean, one story in there was like some guy was having trouble providing for his like 3 kids and his wife because he played for some minor league team. It's like, great, go get a real job. You're getting paid to play a game. So no, I am not. I don't think they should be unionized at all. All right, last question. Gosh dang it. All right, last question is that should you let your for those that have chickens or care about chickens, would you rather have free range chickens or would you have cage-free chickens? And cage-free chickens are basically, they're in a coop. They're not locked up in their individual cages, so they can run around and stuff, but they're outside of a cage.
So I don't have any chickens, but I eat them and the things they produce pretty regularly. So if we're talking either the meat or the eggs, I will take cage-free over caged and free range over cage-free. The more room they have to run around and peck at the ground and eat worms and seeds and that sort of thing, the better their meat and their eggs taste. So the more room they have, the better for me.
I guess it depends on who, like me as the consumer, the farmer, or the chickens. If I had to put an egg in my mouth, I would rather it be, the most organic, free-range, cage-free egg out there. But I also think it's necessary to feed the world, and I don't think farmers can do that with all their chickens. And I certainly think the world can afford the prices of having completely free-range or cage-free eggs. So I think it's all good. I like having all the options.
I free range my chickens from 5 o'clock in the evening until sundown, and the reason I pick 5 o'clock is because I have an agreement with my neighbors that they won't let their dogs eat my chickens before 5 o'clock if they allow me to free range my chickens after 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I prefer free range as long as I'm not the farmer taking care of them, because I don't want to go clean up after the chickens are free range in my yard all day. Then it's pretty gross. So I'm for free range, but just as long as I'm not the farmer doing it. All right, that's it for episode 53 of Farming to Markets. We'll see you again next week.